Choose any ATM of your convenience and stand a chance to win gold sovereigns.
Lanka Pay.
Since assuming office for his second term, US President Donald Trump has implemented several stringent measures affecting global trade and economy. He claims that these sanctions are necessary to safeguard the United States' national interests. In a recent statement issued by the White House, the Trump administration declared that certain foreign trade and economic practices have created a national emergency. To counter these challenges, President Trump has issued an executive order imposing new tariffs aimed at strengthening the United States' international economic position and protecting American workers. Upon beginning his second term in January, Trump increased tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada to 25%. Additionally, tariffs on Chinese imports were raised by 10% in two phases, escalating trade tensions between the US, China, Mexico and Canada. Yesterday, following his declaration of a national economic emergency, President Trump designated the day as the Liberation Day in America. He announced that the US would impose tariffs on all countries conducting business with the US, matching the tariffs these nations impose on American goods. As part of this directive, an executive order signed yesterday enforces tariffs on over 100 countries.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. We're going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy.
According to the White House statement, under powers vested in President Trump through the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a 10% tariff will take effect on April 5th, impacting nations such as the United Kingdom, Singapore, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, Turkey, Colombia and Argentina. Furthermore, countries with significant trade deficits with the US will face higher individualized tariffs. Accordingly, Lesotho faces the highest tariff at 50%, followed by Cambodia at 49%, Vietnam 46%, Myanmar 44%, Iraq 39%, Thailand 36% and Sri Lanka 44%, placing it among the 10 most heavily taxed nations under the new policy.
Sri Lanka, 88%. We could take the full 88%. Thanks a lot.
According to White House reports, China, which was previously subject to a 20% tariff, will now face an additional 34%, bringing the total tariff on Chinese imports to 54%. Among South Asian nations, Bangladesh will be subject to a 37% tariff, India to 26% and Pakistan to 29%. Meanwhile, Nepal, Afghanistan, Bhutan and the Maldives will maintain a baseline tariff of 10%. The European Union as a whole will be subject to a 20% tariff. In 2024, Sri Lanka's annual merchandise exports amounted to $12.7 billion, with the US purchasing approximately $2.9 billion worth of goods, accounting for about 23% of Sri Lanka's total exports. Apparels and textiles comprised 65% of Sri Lanka's exports to the US, followed by rubber and rubber-based products in second place and coconut-based products in third. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's imports from the US stood at approximately $370 million. The US has so far imposed an 11% tariff on Sri Lankan exports. However, US authorities claimed that Sri Lanka imposes an average tariff of 88% on American imports.
It goes without saying that this is a major shock to Sri Lanka and it has very serious ramifications. Financial markets have already reacted to this, but I think the worst is yet to come. So what can Sri Lanka do about this? We can turn America's Liberation Day to our Liberation Day, because to protect a few families, there are very large protectionist tariffs in Sri Lanka in the form of cess and pal, which are called para-tariff. These have come about in the last 15 years. The nexus between politicians and businessmen very strong, because this is an act of rent-seeking. So although this is going to be a major crisis for Sri Lanka, it's a fabulous opportunity to reform our economy to be more open to trade, which is a major driver for productivity and future growth. So Sri Lanka, although it is going to go through a spot of bother in the short term, can turn it to its advantage and reform its trade regime. We need to negotiate strongly with the United States. We are in a very vulnerable stage. We are yet carrying a large amount of debt. I don't think the United States would like Sri Lanka to fall again. And we have to be rational and pragmatic, the economic policies. But out of this calamity, I think the Sri Lankan consumer will benefit if we reduce this highly protectionist tariff regime so that our consumers will be able to buy products cheaper with more competition, more choice.
We have a massive trade surplus with the US, but the US has very low tariff rates for Sri Lankan goods. But on the Sri Lankan side, we cannot say that. We have not been fair when it comes to importing US goods. We also have para-tariffs, non-tariff barriers as well. So that is something the Sri Lankan government has to look into. Apparel is going to take a big hit. Sri Lanka will definitely feel the effects in the coming months. There will also be an impact on the currency. We expect a lot from the US coming in through exports. Once that stops or dwindles down, that's going to have an effect. The number one thing the government should be doing immediately, which has been in the talks for a long time, is reduce and over the medium term completely remove para-tariff. The other thing is we should, in fairness, try to import anything we can in the medium to long term from the United States by reducing tariff.
The announcement of reciprocal tariffs of 44% on Sri Lanka that came out this morning is something that is of major concern to the apparel export industry. The US is our single biggest market, and a tariff of 44%, which is much higher than that applicable to our competitors, will mean that product will move from Sri Lanka to competitor countries. Having said that, JAF is very appreciative of the steps taken by the government to set up a task force immediately to look at what action can be taken to address these valid concerns, and we look forward to continuing to work closely with the government on this matter in order to arrive at a resolution that would meet both the US government's concerns and also Sri Lanka's ability to export.
In response to these developments, Sri Lankan President Anura Dissanayake has appointed a high-level committee to analyse the potential challenges posed by the new reciprocal tariffs and present recommendations to the government. The committee comprises the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance, the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, the Chairman of the Board of Investment of Sri Lanka, the Chairman of the Export Development Board of Sri Lanka, and the Director General of Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Additionally, the committee includes Senior Economic Advisor to the President Duminda Hulangamua, Chief Economic Policy Advisor to the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce Shiran Fernando, as well as business leaders Ashraf Omar, Sharad Amalin and Saif Jafferji. This is part of the United States trade policy. They have analysed the factors putting them at a disadvantage and have implemented a tariff strategy accordingly. There has been concern that Sri Lanka failed to discuss or intervene to lower these tariffs, which is completely false. Even before the implementation of these measures, we anticipated these changes and engaged in discussions with relevant institutions and experts to evaluate possible steps if such tariffs were imposed. We cannot prevent the US from implementing its trade policy. What we can do is negotiate based on these new developments. We have already exchanged ideas with US officials, and as these tariffs take effect on April 9th, we are actively exploring whether they can be reduced through further discussions. The global business landscape has been thrown into turmoil following President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff measures. Markets and businesses worldwide are grappling with the economic fallout as countries face varying levels of tariffs on their exports to the US. India, which has been hit with a 26% tariff on all goods exported to the US, was singled out by President Trump as being harsh with its own levies. Trump described the 26% tariff as a discounted reciprocal tariff in response to India's 52% tariffs on American goods. The Indian government has worked meticulously in recent weeks to negotiate tariff concessions in an effort to protect its nearly $14 billion worth of annual exports to the US. However, Indian officials described the new tariff as a mixed bag rather than a setback for the country. China, which has been one of the hardest hit nations with tariffs exceeding 50%, has strongly condemned the move. Beijing has urged Washington to immediately cancel the tariffs, warning that they endanger global economic development and could harm US interests and international supply chains. The United Kingdom, which had initially expected a 20% tariff, expressed relief after being subjected to a lower 10% tariff. Media reports suggest that Prime Minister Keir Starmer's more diplomatic approach to the Trump administration played a key role in securing the reduced tariff rate. South Korea, Asia's fourth largest economy, has taken urgent measures in response to the United States' 25% tariffs. Acting President Han Duck-soo acknowledged the severity of the situation, stating that with the reality of a global tariff war approaching, the government must mobilize all available resources to overcome the trade crisis. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, reacting to the tariffs, questioned whether it made sense for the US to apply uniform tariffs to all countries, particularly given Japan's position as one of the largest investors in the US. Japanese Trade and Industry Minister Yoji Muto called the tariffs extremely regrettable and noted that Tokyo was still attempting to persuade the Trump administration to reconsider. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, while acknowledging that no one got a better deal than Australia, facing only the baseline 10% tariff, criticised the move as a hostile act against a key ally. Albanese remarked that a true reciprocal tariff would be 0, not 10%, and that this was not the act of a friend. While Canada has been exempted from the latest round of tariffs, it continues to face 25% levies on steel, aluminium and automobiles. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney vowed to challenge the tariffs, stating that they will fight the tariffs with countermeasures and build the strongest economy in the G7. Taiwan has labelled the new tariffs as very unreasonable and announced that it would raise the issue with the US government. Reports indicate that Taiwanese officials had been preparing a response to the tariffs for months, including plans to increase energy imports and lower its own tariffs to balance trade relations with the US. The global financial markets have reacted strongly to President Trump's sweeping tariff measures, with major stock indices experiencing significant declines. Japan's Nikkei fell 2.7%, Hong Kong's Hang Seng dropped 1.6%, South Korea's and Australia's stock indices declined 2% each, the London Stock Exchange slipped 1.4%, and Vietnam's stock index plunged 8%. Additionally, shares of world-leading US technology giants such as Apple and Nvidia have also recorded losses. Oil prices have also fallen by over 3% as investors fear that escalating trade tensions could ignite a full-scale global trade war, slowing economic growth and reducing fuel demand. These tariffs come at a time when ongoing geopolitical conflicts have already placed significant strain on the global economy. As a result, economic experts warn that the situation could push the world toward a global economic recession.